Hey folks, back with another video. Let's dive into what stories got my attention today. Starting with the war that is taking place in Ethiopia. The war has so far killed hundreds and has sent 30,000 refugees into Sudan and has called into question whether Africa's youngest leader can hold together Ethiopia's myriad fractious ethnic groups. Now, of course, he has been refusing any appeals for talks. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's government says its forces are marching on Tigray's capital Mekelle and will soon triumph over the local ruling Tigray People's Liberation Front, which he accuses of revolt. Now, the rebels say that they have captured tanks and artillery and held off the offensive despite being massively outnumbered. The TPLF says that Abiy, the ex-military comrade and one-time political partner, has removed Tigrayans from senior security and government posts since he took office in 2018 and now wants to dominate them completely, which indicates to me the fact that maybe Prime Minister Abiy has been planning this for a long time. Now, Abiy's government has put former officials, many Tigrayans, on trial for crimes like torture, murder, and corruption, but denies any attempt at ethnic domination. Debretsion Gebre-Michael, elected Tigrayan president in post that Ethiopia does not recognize, told Reuters that by a text that his forces had fallen back, but denied government allegations that they destroyed bridges and a road leading to the capital. Ethiopian federal forces are trying to advance along a long main roads from the south and the northwest of Mekelle and had got within around 200 kilometers of the Tigrayan capital, according to a diplomat monitoring the conflict said. Now, the Tigrayan leaders accuse federal forces of targeting civilians, churches, and homes. The government says it is only hitting TPLF targets and has accused Tigrayan forces of using civilians as human shields. The northern state is largely cut off as media are barred, most communications are down, and aid workers are pulling out, meaning it cannot, meaning it is even more difficult than before to verify any assertion from either side. Hundreds of thousands have been uprooted from homes while internet, electricity, and banking services have been blocked. Some refugees have said militias from Amhara, the neighboring state, attacked them because of ethnicity. There have also been reports of Tigrayan losing jobs and facing discrimination elsewhere. The TPLF has also fired rockets into neighboring Eritrea, escalating the war beyond national borders. It has a long-standing enmity with the President Isaias Afwerki's government, which has denied sending troops into Tigray against the rebels. Ethiopia's army is one of the Africa's strongest, but many officers were Tigrayan and much of its heavy weaponry was based in Tigray on the front line of the standoff with Eritrea after the 1998-2000 war. The Tigrayans are also a battle-hardened force with experience of fighting against Eritrea and spearheading the ouster of a Marxist dictatorship in 1991. Ethiopia has issued arrest warrants for 76 senior military officers on treason charges for their links to Tigrayan leaders, state-affiliated Fana TV said. Now it seems that the civil war is going to continue with a mix of spillover into the neighboring countries. Currently, it is impacting Eritrea and Sudan, but I wouldn't be surprised if more countries are also impacted by this. Of course, I will continue to keep an eye on this conflict to see how the whole conflict plays out. Moving on into the Middle East region, Saudi Arabia has reportedly told Yemen's Houthi movement that it would sign a United Nations sponsored ceasefire deal if the group agreed to a buffer zone along the kingdom's border. According to three informed sources cited by Reuters on Tuesday, the two parties have recently held virtual discussions with a higher level of representations, including Mohammed Abdul Salam, the Houthis' chief negotiator, and a more senior Saudi official. Riyadh has been engaged in indirect talks with the group since last year, but the talks have stalled over the past 2 months with the escalation of fighting in the oil-rich region of Marib, where the Houthis have launched an offensive drive out of Saudi-backed forces loyal to President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi. Hadi's government was ousted from the capital Sana'a by the Houthis in the late 2014s, prompting a Saudi-led coalition, which also includes the United Arab Emirates, to intervene. Now, in the latest talks, Riyadh has demanded more security assurances from the Houthis, including a buffer zone along its border with northern Yemen until a UN-backed transitional government is formed, the sources have said. Now, Riyadh wants the Iran-aligned Houthis, who control northern Yemen and its biggest populated areas, to leave a corridor along the Saudi border to prevent incursions and artillery fire. In exchange, the kingdom would ease an air and sea blockade as part of the UN proposal for a ceasefire, which already includes an end to cross-border attacks. If a deal is struck, it would mark the biggest breakthrough in efforts to reach a political settlement since the beginning of the conflict, widely seen as a proxy war between the arch-enemies Saudi Arabia and Iran. The Trump administration is reportedly planning to designate the Houthis as a terrorist organization before leaving office in January, triggering fears that the move would spoil UN efforts to broker an end to the conflict. Meanwhile, sources told Reuters on Tuesday that the Houthis may be less willing to cooperate with Saudi Arabia if Trump carries out those threats before leaving office. Now, the discreet talks between the kingdom and the Houthis have dragged on for more than a year, in parallel with UN envoy Martin Griffiths' effort to reach an agreement on a ceasefire. The UN is working to secure a face-to-face meeting before the end of the year, as well as an agreement on joint declaration that would halt all air, ground, and naval hostilities, two of the sources have said. Now, Europe would be a logical venue for them to meet, one of the sources said, as the UN seeks neutral grounds for the talks. Griffith's office declined to comment to Reuters. The conflict in Yemen has killed tens of thousands of people, mostly civilians, and displaced millions in what the UN has called the world's worst humanitarian disaster. Recently, the conflict has begun to shift more towards an escalating economic siege that has further deepened the suffering of many Yemenis. Now, the conflict in Yemen has been one of the most catastrophic blunder of Mohammed bin Salman. This has shown that Crown Prince has a lot to learn about war. An example being he needs to learn a thing called an exit strategy when entering the war. And it seems that the Crown Prince is just running, trying to save face. Well, whatever the reason, I wish that there is peace and an end to this war, which has disproportionately impacted the children. Moving on to Thailand, thousands of demonstrators have marched on Thailand's police headquarters in downtown Bangkok on Wednesday for a second day of protest after 6 people were shot during violent crashes. Protests, numbering more than 10,000 according to an AFP estimate, packed the Ratchaprasong intersection in the heart of Bangkok's shopping and commercial district after the leaders vowed to step up the movement. After daubing anti-royal slogans on walls and the ground, they marched on the heavily defended National Police headquarters, led by a clown and a parade of giant inflatable rubber ducks. Some protesters threw glass bottles and paint bombs over the walls of police headquarters, which was barricaded with dumper trucks, concrete blocks, and razor wire, while others used water pistols to hurl paint inside the compound. Many had come equipped with helmets, goggles, and gas masks to protect themselves against police action. Wednesday's protest came a day after the most violent confrontation since the protest movement began in July, as police used tear gas and irritant laced water cannon on protesters trying to reach Parliament, and activists clashed with royalists. Now, more than 50 people were injured, six of them with gunshot wounds, according to medical officials, though it is not clear who was responsible for the shooting. Prime Minister Prayut has urged protesters to refrain from violence, but there is little sign the demonstrators are prepared to back down. Lawmakers have this week been discussing various proposals for constitutional change which mostly exclude any reform to the monarchy. On Wednesday, they agreed to look at two proposals for a quote, constitutional drafting assembly, end quote, while rejecting more far reaching bills to revise the role of the royals and change the makeup of the Senate. Now, as the Thai protesters ratchet up the pressure on the government, I'm going to see how long this protest can last and how strong is the will of the government. Moving over into Uganda, Ugandan presidential candidate and pop star Bobby Wine, who is seeking to replace long-ruling President Yoweri Museveni, was arrested on Wednesday while campaigning in the east of the country, he said on Twitter. In two tweets, Wine, whose real name is Robert Kyagulanyi, said police had violently broken into his vehicle and taken him into custody. Police did not immediately respond to a request for comment. A local independent newspaper, Daily Monitor, reported demonstrators had erected barricades and lit fires on some roads in the capital Kampala and at least one other town to protest against Wine's arrest. Now, since expressing his intention to run against Museveni, Wine has won a large following, especially among young people in the East African country. The young generation supporters explain they are drawn to him by his criticism of Museveni's government mingled in his lyrics. Others say that as a young leader he is better positioned to tackle the challenges they face. Now, while arresting the pop star is a downright a dumb movement, I mean, there is no need to do such a thing unless you plan to make yourself or your image as a cartoon villain. These are counterproductive measures, to say the least. I mean, I would urge the Ugandan president Museveni to immediately release him. This is just not good politics on any front. It just doesn't show any strength on the president's part. Anyway, moving back into the Middle East, Iraq and Saudi Arabia on Wednesday reopened their land border for the first time in 30 years, with closer trade ties between the two countries irking allies of Riyadh's rival Tehran. Now, top officials, including Iraq's interior minister and the head of his border commission, traveled from Baghdad to formally open the Arar crossing. They met up with a delegation who had joined them from Riyadh, all en masse, and cut a red ribbon at the border crossing as a line of cargo trucks waited behind them. Now, Arar will be open to both goods and people for the first time since Riyadh cut off its diplomatic relations with Baghdad in 1990, following Iraqi ex-dictator Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. Ties have remained rocky ever since, but current Iraqi Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi has a close personal relationship with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Kadhimi was to travel to Saudi Arabia on his first foreign trip as Prime Minister in May, but the visit was cancelled at the last minute when the Saudi King Salman was hospitalized. Now, he has yet to make the trip, although Iraqi ministers have visited Riyadh to meet with their counterparts, and a top-level Saudi delegation traveled to Baghdad last week. Baghdad sees Arar as a potential alternative to its crossing with the eastern neighbor Iran, through which Iraq brings in a large share of its imports. The two Arab states are also exploring the reopening of a second border point at Al Jumaima along Iraq's southern border with the Saudi kingdom. But pro-Iran factions in Iraq, which call themselves the quote-unquote Islamic resistance, have stood firmly against closer ties with Saudi Arabia. Ahead of Arar's opening, one such group identified as Ashab al-Kahf published a statement announcing its rejection of the Saudi project in Iraq. The closer ties have been a long time coming. Now, they did not improve much after Saddam's toppling in the 2003 US-led invasion, as Riyadh looked at the new Shia-dominated political class with suspicion due to their ties to Iran. A thaw began in 2017 when then Saudi Foreign Minister Adil al-Jubeir traveled to Baghdad, the first such visit in decades, followed by a Riyadh trip by Iraqi Premier Haider al-Abadi. The first commercial flights resumed between the two countries, and officials began discussing Arar with high-profile U.S. diplomat Brett McGurk, even visiting the crossing in 2017 to support its reopening. But those plans were repeatedly delayed, with Arar only open on rare occasions to allow through Iraqi religious pilgrims on their way to Mecca for the Hajj. Iraq is the second largest producer in the OPEC oil cartel, outranked only by Saudi Arabia. Its oil, gas, and electricity infrastructure is severely outdated and inefficient, but low oil prices this year have stymied efforts to revamp it. Kazmi's government has sought to fast-track foreign investments, including Saudi support for energy and agriculture. On his trip to Washington this summer, he agreed to a half-dozen projects that would use Saudi funding to finance U.S. energy firms. Now, Iraq needs to have an open trade with both its neighbors and the world, coupled with a strong adherence to the rule of law that protects the individual rights and property rights. I would urge the Iraqi government to become effectively independent. They should not be too tied to any of its neighbors, whether that be the Iran or the Saudis. They need to become their own man, so to speak. Well, that's it for this video. If you liked the video, then hit that like button and hit that subscribe button for future updates. Write in the comment sections your thoughts, criticism, and anything I might have missed. And I will see you in the next video.